Hey, hang on at the end of this video so I can tell you about one of my favorite new and delicious finds. It only took me one look at this graph to fall, Alice in Wonderland style, into a rabbit hole full of parasites, pathogens, and produce, where I ended up trying to untangle a surprisingly complicated question. What is the riskiest type of food to eat? This is MinuteFood. Look, I know that figures from scientific papers are not generally the most compelling way to start a video, but I'm rolling with it here, because check this out. This graph from a CDC study shows that produce, stuff like fruits, vegetables, and herbs, sickens more people in the US than meat and seafood do, which seemed, well, bananas to me. I've always heard way more about why I should be careful buying, prepping, and cooking meat and seafood than fruits or veggies. So I had always just assumed that animal products were a way bigger risk than produce. So I had to figure out what's going on here. Foodborne illness, aka food poisoning to most of us non-experts, as the name suggests, happens when you get sick from eating something. But it's not the food itself making you sick. It's disease-causing stuff on or in the food that causes the illness. Most commonly bacteria, viruses, parasites, or toxins. Even so, the type of food involved is important, because different types of foods have different attributes that can make them more prone to hosting certain nasties. I was definitely familiar with some of those things about meat, like that the ways animals are raised and slaughtered can contaminate meat. And meat is full of moisture and has a nice neutral pH, just the kind of environment where lots of nasty microbes grow best. But as I looked more into produce, I realized that fruits and vegetables also have a bunch of risk factors. Just like meat, some kinds of produce, like cantaloupe, are also moist and neutral pH, making them perfect incubators for pathogens. What's more, lots of fruits and veggies grow in, or at least near, the soil, where a lot of microorganisms and parasites thrive. So it's relatively easy for these foods to get contaminated. Then there's the matter of texture. I mean, look at this broccoli, this romaine, and again with the cantaloupe. There are tons of nooks and crannies for nasties to snuggle into and hide. Finally, there's the fact that, unlike meat, which we generally cook, killing off a lot of the nasties in the process, people tend to eat a lot of produce raw, pathogens and all. All of these factors might be contributing to the disproportionate number of illnesses caused by fruits and veggies in that CDC graph. That is not to say that the scientific evidence is clear-cut that produce is a bigger driver of foodborne illness than meat. There are also a bunch of studies that show the exact opposite, meat-based cases outnumbering produce-based cases. So what gives? A big part of what's going on here is that attributing cases of foodborne disease to particular foods is incredibly difficult. When most people get a suspected case of food poisoning, they don't actually report it. At least here in the US, experts estimate that for every reported case of foodborne illness, there are somewhere around 40 cases that go unreported. That means the vast majority of cases of foodborne illness aren't reflected in the data. Then there's the matter of figuring out the pathogen that caused the illness and identifying the particular food that was carrying that pathogen, none of which is easy. In all, experts only end up identifying the food responsible for a tiny, tiny fraction of the foodborne illnesses they think happen every year. Then, when researchers actually sit down to use this data, they have to make all sorts of decisions about what time frame to look at, what pathogens to include, how to group the foods, and whether to consider all illnesses, just hospitalizations, or only deaths. All this means that different studies can end up with very different estimates about the riskiness of different types of food. So what can we actually say when it comes to the likelihood of getting sick from produce versus meat? I asked a bunch of food safety experts this question, and most of them thought that plant and animal products were basically in the same ballpark. So if we're talking sheer numbers of cases of food poisoning in the US each year, I think it's safe, to say that produce and meat are more or less equally risky. But there is another big wrinkle here. Most people eat more produce than meat or seafood. And the more of any particular food you eat, the higher your chances of ingesting enough nasties from that food to make you sick. If we want to figure out which foods are riskiest independent of our eating habits, we need to adjust for how much of each we eat. And when you do that, a really different picture emerges. Seafood starts looking a lot sketchier. Pound for pound, seafood is way more likely to make you sick than meat, veggies, or fruit. There is an ocean of different reasons for this. Like meat, seafood tends to be moist and pH neutral. And like produce, it's often eaten raw or barely cooked. Seafood is also really prone to accumulating contaminants from the water. And at least here in the US, a lot of it is imported, making oversight more complicated. For instance, most shrimp comes from large aquaculture farms abroad, and it's hard to regulate and monitor how these farms are run. This doesn't mean, however, that I'm giving up on seafood, or any other foods we've talked about. While it certainly isn't perfect, food safety in the US is remarkably good. Assuming you aren't in any high-risk groups, you are exceedingly unlikely to get a serious case of food poisoning, one that requires hospitalization, and way less likely than that to die from foodborne disease. I don't want to downplay the issue here. You should absolutely be vigilant and follow good food safety practices. But you also shouldn't let fear of food poisoning keep you from eating foods that are healthy or simply delicious. On that note, this sushi isn't gonna eat itself. Besides sushi, another thing I will never give up: coffee. And if you're a coffee drinker, you have to try Trade, which sponsored this video. Trade basically scours the country, picking the very best coffees from the very best roasters. Then, based on your preferences, they send you the ones they think you'll love. Each bag is roasted and packaged to order and delivered to you on your choice of schedule, so you get exactly what you want when you want it. Trade has been a game changer for me, because even though I thought I knew what I liked as far as coffee, with Trade I've been able to try a bunch of different super high quality coffees with basically no effort on my part. And that's given me a much better idea of exactly what I want in my cup. This coffee, Season of the Witch, with those bourbon cherry notes, was amazing. Plus, it's farmed, sourced, and roasted by women, which I love. I cannot wait to try whatever Trade sends my way next. Trade is so confident you'll love your experience that they're offering you, as a Minute Food fan, 30% off your first month. Visit drinktrade.com/minutefood to try it out. And remember that when you support our sponsors, like Trade, you are also supporting Minute Food. Thanks to you, and thanks to Trade for sponsoring this video.